Hi, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. The webinar today is Integrating Data Integrity Principles into Your Quality Management System. My name is Ashley Sherrick. I'm one of the Growth Marketing Managers here at Qualio, and I will be moderating today's session. So today's structure of the webinar is going to be about 45 minutes long with a question and answer session right directly after that. If you have any questions during this webinar, please feel free to type it in the chat and we'll address it during the end of the session. If we cannot get to your questions today, then we'll absolutely follow up via email in the next couple of days. And also you will be receiving a copy of this webinar through the email that you registered also in the next couple of days. So a quick information about Qualio. So Qualio is here for enabling life science teams to launch and scale life-saving products just like any other company in the life sciences industry. So we get new products to market faster by simplifying and uniting your team's processes and data in an all-in-one quality management software to enable you to launch and scale life-saving products. So I am very excited to introduce our speakers today. We have Shirley Hart, a consultant and owner of SMHart Systems LLC, and Tanya Sharma, who is a co-founder of Assurea LLC and SMHart Consulting. So on that note, I will pass it on to the presenters and let them take it from here.
Great, thanks. As Ashley said, I'm an independent consultant. I've been doing this, working in lab informatics for about 30 years and consulting for over 10. And Tanya, if you want to give a brief introduction.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ashley, for such a kind introduction. I am the co-founder for Assurea LLC, and I have expertise in data integrity, and I work in projects with data integrity and emerging technologies like blockchain. I also lead several initiatives within ISPE, so I'm happy to connect on LinkedIn as well, so feel free to reach out. And today, as Ashley mentioned, our topic is integrating data integrity principles into your QMS. So we're going to talk about what is data integrity, why are we talking about it, introduction to data integrity by design, incorporating standardization data integrity templates into your QMS, and then we'll have a discussion on computer software assurance, and then we'll have some time for Q&A as well. We talk about data integrity a lot in our industry, and data integrity is completeness, consistency, and accuracy of data. And oftentimes data integrity is looked as a project or data integrity remediation or being inspection ready. But data integrity should really be built into the fabric of our organization. It really starts with building a culture of data integrity. And it starts with the leadership and having ownership to communicate data integrity principles into the organization so that it can channel through to others as well. And spreading the awareness, having data integrity trainings, then only we can have policies and procedures related to data integrity and control behavioral, technical, and procedural gaps and in data integrity, and also have supporting processes like validation and having that consistency continue to build onto our process as well, and being inspection ready comes with it, or qualifying a system, as you will see in this presentation as well. Once lost, data integrity can never be regained, and that's why it's really important to look at data integrity holistically.
So why are we talking about data integrity, and what exactly does it mean? If you follow any of the FDA inspections, a lot of the recent 483s, probably in the last, probably 10 years now, a lot of the findings are citing data integrity. And a lot of these problems come from silos where you have the data in different areas, or two or more areas are doing the exact same thing, but they're doing it differently. So you have similar data, but housed differently or managed differently. For an example, you might have, I recently had a customer where they had GCP and GMP. They actually had two different quality managers, completely different SOPs for change control. And my project came along and I just needed to do it for software. In order to not conflict with their existing SOPs, we ended up doing a software change control just so that, you know, we didn't have that problem. But they really should be just one SOP for change control. There's also the risk-based approach, and that's been floating around for a long time with GAMP5 and even before that. And what does that mean? It boils down to, if you have a higher risk, you want more controls. But then how to determine if something's high risk can be very subjective. So you're better off having some way of calculating the risk, or at least doing it in a consistent manner. And that just involves training and defining what it means for your company and for what you're using it for. Risk determinations can be done for different things. At a corporate level, it could be your comfort level, whether or not you're willing to take on risk, risk in having less validation, for example, or you really want more because you have that comfort level that you need to fulfill. For software, it's usually the risk of failing if something just doesn't work, or of not catching it if it doesn't. But higher risk items like security would be a higher risk item. The text that's in a tooltip, I'd say that's pretty low risk. But I've seen places where they test everything to the same level across the board. So critical thinking comes into place, where you just need to document what your approach is and how you're going to be aligning those. And it also aligns with the current regulatory thinking. You know, the little C in CGMP means current. So they're always raising that bar over time. And this is part of it as far as the data integrity approaches, and CSA kind of goes along with that. One question that comes up a lot is data integrity versus data quality. And they're often used interchangeably, but there is some differences. Data quality really means the fitness for the intended use and the metadata and context around it. My favorite one is, I've had systems where, you know, you have a number, the number is meaningless unless I have units to go with it. And in some cases, if you have the wrong units, you know, trouble can happen. So it has to make it, the data needs to be useful. Data quality is usually dealing with processes. I did have an example, this is a long time ago, where I was happy, had this new system put in. They wanted me to validate it and they had an audit trail. Yay, but the audit trail was not human readable. I mean, I could open it up and all I could see was basically garbage. So I couldn't actually validate that to Part 11 requirements. But the quality wasn't there because it wasn't, you know, usable. The data integrity comes into play when you're maintaining that quality of the data. And that goes like over time and making sure that it's you can trust that data. So that's where you often see technology and surrounding processes like backups, reviews, a lot of times periodic reviews. But if you, like I said, you can have one without the other, and they're all overlapping a little bit, but both are actually needed. And recently, I'd say data integrity was more overlooked, and that's why you're seeing a lot more of the 483s and things like that around data integrity. So here's some examples of when you can have one without the other. So data quality without data integrity would be a case where you have instruments that are transferring data to a LIMS, but users on the instruments can modify or delete the data prior to the transfer. Well, then you don't have good data, but you have a good process for transferring it, but the data coming in is very questionable. The flip side of that, you can have data integrity without data quality, where you have that a secure transfer of data to the LIMS, but test methods on different instrument types or different groups or even different sites, they may appear differently in the LIMS for the same exact measurement. So the data is trusted, but it's very difficult to use. If you want to get any trending or, you know, actually use that data in reports even sometimes, it makes it a lot more difficult. So there you have data integrity, but you don't have the quality. It's not as usable as it should be.
Thank you, Shirley. And as I also wanted to share data integrity by design. Data integrity by design is a guidance document by ISPE. And this is a really good visual to show that achieving data integrity requires unifying systems and also walking through the risk elements throughout your system lifecycle. And as Shirley mentioned, the importance of critical thinking and understanding risk throughout the process, I thought this was a good visual to share. Risk should be evaluated based on patient safety, product quality, and data integrity, because ultimately we are responsible for patient data and also serving patients. If you start from the business process, then you can understand and determine the inputs and outputs of data being created, how it's transferred in the functional area, and how it interacts with different systems as well. That way, we can control data integrity by understanding how our data flows within that function, and we can plan our data lifecycle better. Also, in parallel, we need to have periodic review and change control procedures as well. And as you can see from this visual, we really need to emphasize on the importance of using a risk-based approach and critical thinking throughout our computerized lifecycle. Before we go into the next slide, I also wanted to add that based on FDA findings and inspections, 41 to 48% of errors happen in the specification phase. And that's why we will see in the next slide the importance of having standardized document workflows. And there's several issues when it comes to data integrity, but we wanted to highlight the importance of consistency, standardization, and traceability. We really need to eliminate barriers and silos in documentation, and that's where we can really leverage quality management systems to be a repository and maintain consistency throughout the document lifecycle. And there's some examples that I think there are some examples that I wanted to share as well, just walking through how a QMS really helps keeping everything in one place. If we're qualifying a new example and new system and we have a standardized document workflow, then we're using the same steps and we maintain consistency for our qualification process. And we're able to visualize what is going to come next as we go through the process. We can assess the impact of the system by using a GXP impact assessment. We can see what are the periodic review and change control procedures. And as we plan our qualification, the data document workflow can be a tool that we use because we can have standard procedures for validation templates. We can have data integrity questionnaires and checklists, and also have supplier information. Also, if we're qualifying a new system, if the same system is in multiple sites, there can be redundancy, and departments might have different user requirements and different risk assessments for the same computerized system. Then that same computerized system might have different naming conventions, might have different test results, and a different process for reviewing documents. This can really add to the inconsistency for the organization, and also have inadequate risk assessments. And it's not a unified approach across sites, especially when we want to trend data, when we want to look at root causes, when we want to troubleshoot, there isn't that consistency. That's why it's really important to have the same procedures and process for all sites, and use quality management system to convey the importance of following a document workflow that everybody has access to and everyone can use. Also, some questions that we should consider when we add approvals and review to our documents are, do we have the right people on board for review, and are the process owners and system owners providing the feedback that we need? Are we capturing the right reviews? And we can see from this slide, having data integrity governance, quality standards, computerized system planning, data integrity training, and vendor management provides that traceability for regulatory purposes, and also for the access for everyone and guidance that we can have. We'll be able to trend and deep dive into root causes, and you can also able to trend the system. If the same problems are happening with the system at 2 different sites, you're able to leverage information and see the history of the system as well. Especially when it comes to computerized system planning, the requirements can be tested correctly, test scripts can be developed using the same requirements, and configuration is correctly captured in a system admin SOP. So if we can build our data integrity workflow into our QMS, we really reduce the risk of deviations and data integrity issues, because everything is in one place and it's not siloed across several different document management systems as well. And we're able to problem solve and troubleshoot a lot better. And another example is, if you have a URS, you can already have all of the data integrity requirements as part of the URS. And that way, every system is going through the same process, it's going through the same thought process and critical thinking as well. And also the foundational data integrity documents should not be siloed across different document management systems as well. So this is really good to consider, to have a unified approach and having everything when it comes to data integrity in one place.
And like Tanya was saying, data integrity and data quality, like I said, still go hand in hand. And the data integrity often looks at security and reviews, and data quality is looking specifically at processes and naming conventions. And I know she touched on the naming conventions as being key. But you want to make sure from the quality side that your internal data audits also include all your data integrity aspects. How often are reviews conducted? How often is a backup and restore tested? I've had instances where, the validation went great. The backup was validated and everything, but after the validation, the backup actually never occurred on the instrument. So it was never being verified, that it was happening. And restores do need to be tested. So computer software assurance it's a new term that's been floating around probably for a couple of years now. It did recently come out in the ISPE Data Integrity by Design. It's in Appendix S2, as you can see here. But the background of it is it came out of the FDA Industry CSA team, which is FICSA. I don't know if they pronounce that FICSA or what, but that started in 2014, and it has a bunch of members from different people in the industry as well as consulting companies. So there's FDA representation, Gilead's there, Johnson & Johnson, Medtronic, Siemens, and a whole lot of others. Their mission statement, and I got this right off of their LinkedIn profile, is to drive a paradigm shift to a leaner, value-driven, and patient-focused transformation from CSV to CSA. The big push for this was, you mentioned validation, and most people cringe unless you're consulting getting paid to be doing it. It's very labor intensive, it's very documentation intensive. And I can tell you, I've spent days sometimes just writing out deviations for simple little protocol errors, the PGEs, protocol generation errors. And it's just a lot of documentation, it's a lot of screenshots, and there's not that much value in it. It doesn't produce a better product. I've also heard a lot of people that said, well, why is there an error? We validated it. Well, it's only as good as your testing. So Right now, there is the ISPE design by DI by design that talks about CSA in the appendix. They also have a new document just came out this month, and I have that in a later slide that goes into a little bit more detail on that. They are expecting an FDA guidance document to come out this year, and a lot of people are kind of waiting for that, but there really is no reason to wait. This is here. You should be doing this now. And what exactly is CSA? First of all, it applies pretty much to any software, but not software on a medical device. But you can use it and leverage it for a lot of different aspects of validation. It's very similar to CSV, where CSV is just computer systems validation, but it relies more on critical thinking, which is to me just common sense. So it's like looking at things and seeing, going back to your risk assessments, is there value in this? Is it a high risk? Is it detectable? And then having less documentation to generate and review. I mean, nobody likes really generating the documents. Nobody in quality, because I've been in quality, likes reviewing them. And the FDA doesn't like reviewing them either, because you get these piles and stacks of documents that nobody wants to go through. And I did remember having a validation manager at one company I worked for, where I had this large packet for a large enterprise software system. And he picked it up and he just said, yeah, it weighs about right. It's probably good. It's like, that's what we've been doing, is just over documenting, pretty much just to kind of cover, what. The CSA approach is more based on risk, and it gives you more guidance on how to do that. And what it will allow you to do is actually produce software with fewer bugs, because you're testing it more. You're doing it more like I used to do when I was doing software development. I was a QA manager for a LIMS vendor, and we used to just let people loose and testing the different modules to see how we could break it. In some cases, we used to have games as to who could, find the most errors. And you can do that if you leverage different ways of documenting it and plan for it. So you actually have faster validations this way, because you have less documentation, you have less protocol generation errors, and overall you save money because you're not writing these longer detailed protocols. You're not doing all the protocol deviations, and the review times take a lot less time. So if you were going to go down that path, where would you start? Well, first you want to get educated and find out more information. Like I said, the ISPE data integrity by design is the first place to start with that appendix. From there, they have a new one. It's called ISPE Good Practice Guide, Enabling Innovation. Tell you the truth, I haven't had a chance to read it. It's a little over 100 pages long, but it does talk about critical thinking, the risk assessments and things like that. Look for different seminars and things. Gather as much information as you can. One good place is the Compliance Group Incorporated. They're on LinkedIn, ISPE, and they have some YouTube videos. They were one of the consultants that worked with the FDA on that other group we were talking about earlier to help develop these tools. But you need to, if you're all on board with that and you know what you're going to start, the first steps would be to look at your own validation SOPs and make sure they allow for risk-based validations. And then you're probably going to want to draft a val plan. So in this case, you're going to determine the scope. In some cases, I've seen val plans that cover departments or areas or groups of equipment or individual systems. But once you determine the scope, that will pick your system, your project, or department, whatever, and that limits it down to a smaller way to start. But the big key piece here would be training. And you need to get people trained so that they understand what the approach means and how to write those validation documents and how to execute the protocols. One of the key things, and unfortunately we don't have enough time to go into all the details around CSA, but one of the key takeaways besides critical thinking is it allows you for two different types of protocols. And one that's called, that's a typical one you're used to, which is your formal script-based one. And the other one is a more flexible, I don't want to say free form, but it's an unscripted one where it doesn't detail every step that you're doing. And in this case, what you would do is, like say if you had, I deal a lot with LIMS systems. So maybe you'd have somebody who you want to just accession a material into supplies. You would just have one that is really high level that you give to the actual user, and the script is only to test that portion of the system. You know, it's add some new supply and make sure that it's usable. So they would do that. If they came up with any problems, they would document the bug. It's more important at this point not to document and take screen captures of did it work, but you want to know what didn't work, or capturing those bugs. That is going to be a key portion of it, because you need to have those bugs. It's almost like you're doing a pilot plan, or like a feasibility study, but you let the end users basically play with the system and do what they would do in a normal day-to-day work situation, without having the huge documentation of the step-by-step, you know, click here, do this, and documenting every single step. For the high risk items, you would still want those protocols. I mean, I still want to know what the software version is, you know, what the hardware components are and things like that, where it's located. You know, so there are always going to be some critical things that need to be documented in better, you know, more detail. But the goal is to have 80% the unscripted and about 20% of those scripted tests, which have the higher documentation overhead. That alone would just save so much time, and like I said, in not generating those PGEs. But again, you need people to be trained in how to do this and how to write them. And you probably need somebody to manage the project in tracking those bugs. You can do it either in a spreadsheet, or I would say whatever method that you're already using. If you use Teams, you can do it there. If you're using Slack, you can do it there. SharePoint, you know, whatever you commonly use to track issues, you could do it there. I wouldn't put it in a formal like help desk software or anything like that, because you just want to track, did this occur? You know, is it reproducible? You know, and was it fixed? A lot of things are going to be configuration changes or learning, where somebody's just doing something wrong. That helps you develop better SOPs in the long run. You don't want to just have an SOP that's developed from vendor's manual. You need to have it so that it does exactly what the people are doing, and you know, short enough to where it makes sense. And then once you have that bug tracking, once you resolve those bugs, either by changing the configuration, or in some cases, getting a new release from the vendor, then you have a good system that has less bugs and that people are going to enjoy more, because it's going to work once it's actually released. And then all those documentation, you still need to review those validation documents, but the number of documents is going to be so much smaller, the review process goes a lot faster. And I know I'm jumping around a lot here, but it's kind of like a crash course in all of validation in, you know, like 5 minutes or less. And that's kind of hard to do. So you need to go out and get as much information as you can, like I said, from these other things that are available out there. If you're not comfortable, or you know there's an area that you're maybe a little weak in, you know, there's lots of consultants, including me and Tanya, and like I said, the Compliance Group Incorporated, that have been developing a lot of tools to help you do this. But overall, it will save you money and time and resources. And all I can say is, you know, apologies to Nike of just do it. If you don't start doing it now, you're going to be left behind. And everybody, like I said, the bar is always rising. It's that current GMP and GCP regulations that you need to stay up to date. And it looks like I ended a little bit early. I probably talked way too fast. But thank you, and I'm sure we might have some questions.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Shirley and Tanya. We do have a handful of questions that we can go over. So the first question is, how should we get our organizations to consider CSA?
Shirley, I don't know if you want to answer first or if I should.
Either way, I know sometimes it's a hard sale. I've had some of my customers even will say that they're waiting for the FDA guidance to come out. Well, hopefully that's supposed to be out this year, so that's not going to be too much longer. I would say recommend trying to do a small project, maybe just one small project, even if it's just a change control, to managing it that way, just to kind of get their feet wet. The biggest thing is making sure that your SOPs support a risk-based approach, and that you could move forward that way.
Yeah, and just to add to that as well, I think that maybe also leveraging a hybrid approach where we introduce CSA, but more in segments rather than the entire program as well might be a good option, because I know that some of my clients, they're also waiting for the FDA guidance to come out, but they're open to the idea of using critical thinking and using a risk-based approach. So we can certainly also do a hybrid model in introducing CSA and also showing the value of less documentation and the importance of critical thinking into developing our life cycle approach and the DI by design visual. I think the ISPE data integrity by design is a really good guide.
Yeah, it's definitely a good starting point for looking at it. But I would also look at some of the other webinars that ISPE has and other ones that are out there on LinkedIn and YouTube videos, because a lot of them show companies that have already gone through this and the value that they're seeing. A lot of them are seeing like 40 to 50, even up to 60% reduction in review times, protocol generation time, across the board. That's a lot of money on a large project. And time, if people want to get a system up and running quicker, this is the way to do it.
Great, thank you, Shirley and Tanya. The next question we have is, during planning, what are some of the documents that we should be developing?
So I think during planning, definitely having a GXP impact assessment would help categorize the system better to see what's the category. Is it a non-configured? Is it a configured system? And after that, having a really good URS with all of the data integrity requirements as part of it.
Okay. Now, the next question is, what are some considerations for a system risk assessment?
Did you want to take that, Tanya, or do you want me to?
Oh, sure. I think for a system risk assessment, as Shirley was mentioning during her slides, and also I touched on it too, critical thinking. That's number one. I mean, especially when it comes to having a lot of resources on ISPE of system categorization, really looking at the complexity of the system and building a risk assessment based on that, like really going through what are we using the system for, what is the complexity of the system, and building a risk assessment based on that, rather than just testing everything. And as Shirley was mentioning, like CSA is going to be, the guidance for CSA is going to be coming out too, to really so it's important to have a risk assessment that shows critical thinking and really tests high impact items.
Okay. Now, what are some recommendations for where to find additional resources?
I think I went over those a little bit. The biggest thing I'd say would be looking for other webinars. There's one coming up I'm going to be attending in October. There's a company, it's called KenX, KENX, that's doing one on validate software and validation. It's here in San Diego, but it's also virtual in, is that October? No, the October one is a webinar that I know of.
December,
And
I
then
think.
the other one's in December, I think. So it's just
Yeah.
looking for the seminars if you want to attend. I know those cost money. If you want to kind of bootstrap it, I'd say look for on LinkedIn and YouTube videos for people who are supporting CSA. There's a lot of information out there.
Okay, good to know. The next question is CSA required?
So validation is required in most regulated industries. Using the CSA approach is not really required, but it's better. I mean, it saves you money, it saves you time. I don't know why you would not want to do those things. But no, using that approach it's not required. But again, they're always raising the bar at, they're going to soon be expecting it. I mean, at one point, the agencies were only expecting you to have a plan. If you had deficiencies in software, you could always have procedural controls if you didn't have technical controls. And that was okay for a while. Well, now it was to the point where then you had to have a plan. And now you need to have a plan and dates, basically, of when you're going to be putting those technical controls into place. So that bar is always moving.
Awesome. Now, this is an interesting question. How do you deal with reluctancy from the management?
Yeah, that's a hard one. It kind of depends on your management. I've talked to some people who, have no idea, what it is. And there it's just educating them and providing them with the materials so that they can get to know it and understand what it is. And then explaining, I would say coming up with kind of a plan as to how, to implement it. You know your own company and your management better than anybody, hopefully. So it's just depends on the manager and the comfort level of change, basically, in a company. Some companies do not like change at all. Other companies, I have one client right now who they already knew about this. They knew about it before I did, and they're all on board and they're ready to, just jump on board and, show them the way. So, there's a lot of variance out there as far as, who does what, but I'd say education more than anything. And if you can find other companies that could talk to them, maybe that if they know them that have gone through this, and see what they think about it.
I think also just wanted to add to that it also depends on the maturity of the organization as well in adapting CSA. Some organizations already have SMEs, they already have experts in the company, or they're able to work with consulting companies to get that expertise. But having that data integrity maturity and understanding the maturity of the organization as well is an important element when it comes to the reluctance of support in something like CSA.
That's very true too. You're right.
Great. And the final question, it looks like, is what are some challenges about using an all-in-one QMS platform?
So I think that planning, when you're a startup or a mid-sized company, you might have a lot of options of quality management systems, or you have different systems to do different things. But that's where really going back to the business process and going back to mapping it out, that's where it's really important to see the value of having everything in one quality management system and the importance of walking through the life cycle. And when it comes to challenges, I think the challenges lie in the planning and everything moving in our industry so fast. And that's where I think that a lot of people struggle, is they have a lot of options, a lot of different segmented sites, and the standardization is the challenge.
Yeah, I think that goes back to the maturity as to whether or not you have it. One of the other challenges I would say that goes along those same lines is, I deal with a lot of customers where they're going through mergers of, multiple companies. So you've got multiple systems because of those multiple companies, and by default, they're already doing things differently and have different naming conventions. And it takes a while to consolidate that information in any system. I know places that are still going through it even after, multiple years. So sometimes it does take time.
And also, I think if you already have a good document workflow, and, even if it's just on paper, for example, that a system's coming in and it's going to go through the GXP impact assessment as a first step, and after that there's all these different workflows, and if you already have that process and that's able to be duplicated no matter where, then that's easy to replicate that into a quality management system. So having just that thought process, having that down on, just having the basics down of how does that workflow look like, and having a visual, then you can replicate that into any quality management system as well. And that's where I think that a lot of the challenges would also be reduced in having those kind of conversations.
Yeah, that's very true. You can't automate a bad process. It's not going to fix it. You need to have that, solid paper process already defined, and then you can automate it, regardless. That applies to QMS system, instrument systems, LIMS systems, anything. Yeah, that process needs to be pretty solid before you can automate it and make some improvements that way.
Great. Thank you two so much. That actually is all of our questions, I believe. Oh, actually, we might have one more. Oh, so we did get a question, but I do not have the answer right now. We did have an attendee ask, is Qualio building document templates for these kinds of DI documentation activities? I will get back to the people that have asked for those specific answers with our product and quality team in the next 24 to 48 hours. So I just wanted to let you guys know that I am reading that, I understand it, and I will absolutely get back. And other than that, there are no further questions. So again, on behalf of Qualio, I really appreciate all of the attendees spending the last hour with us today to learn about just integrating data integrity and quality management systems. So thank you so much, Shirley and Tanya, for taking the time and creating this fantastic presentation. And as I remind everyone, this will be available to watch within the next 24 hours, and you'll also get a live session link that you can share with others who may want to see it at another time. But other than that, we are all set, and you guys have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ashley.
Bye.
Yes,
Thanks,
thank
everybody.
you. Goodbye, everyone.
Goodbye.